Welcome to the Daily Objective. We are, of course, covering what we've been covering for this past week, and we'll continue to cover, as the only topic on the channel for now, which is the war in Israel from different angles. Today, I'm joined by Ayman Osman. You may have seen him on the channel. He's been on not many times, but a few times. I'm pretty sure I've referred to him on the channel as the closest thing the Ayn Rand Center UK has to a co-founder. That's a story for another day. I may have told it already, but in either case, we're not going to talk about that today. We will talk about why seemingly hatred of Jews is prevalent in the Muslim world, and we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. As always, I will give some updates for people who would rather hear the news from us than from mainstream media in the West. So the number of dead, last reported number is still 1,300. So that's at least 1,300 people dead on Israel's side. Only a few hundred have been actually identified, and in part that's because, once again, we're going to give descriptions here that you might not want to hear, so bear that in mind. Part of that is because some of the bodies are in a condition where it's near impossible to identify them. Some have been burned, some have been beheaded. I heard a report yesterday about the place where most of the bodies are taken in the center of Israel, and in body bags, and in some cases you don't know, if there's one body and parts of one body in a bag or more than that. And so this is a process that will take some time. In the potential second front of this war in the north of Israel and the south of Lebanon, there have been explosions on the border. Hezbollah has taken responsibility for that. There have been a few incidents where there's suspicion of terrorists infiltrating Israel, some villages and towns in the north. The locals have been told not to leave their homes. Rocket attacks are continuing. Some of them are from the north. Most of them are still from the Gaza Strip. What else? Today, this was mentioned in a super chat yesterday that Hamas declared International Day of Rage today. So part of that was in France, a teacher was murdered in the classroom by Islamic terrorists. In the West Bank, which has been relatively quiet so far, there have been dozens of incidents with Molotov cocktails and all sorts of attacks on Israeli soldiers. The IDF has told, through the UN, has told the residents of the northern part of Gaza to evacuate. They gave them 24 hours. This was, I think, something like 12 hours ago. So we'll see what that means. I don't know what that means. I know what I would like it to mean, which is severe aerial bombardment of the area. But of course, this could mean that they're planning a ground operation in that area, and of course, a ground operation will undoubtedly result in the deaths of many Israelis. What you can know for sure when Israel tells people in Gaza to evacuate is that the terrorists, or at least their leaders, will evacuate. The only ones who are staying in order to because they're prepared to kill the soldiers coming in. We mentioned in recent days that Boaz Arad from the Ayn Rand Center Israel is running has this program that he runs for gifted students called Atlas Juniors. That is a program that takes place in the town of Ashkelon, the city of Ashkelon, not far from the Gaza border. There have been over 200 rockets fired to that town. So next week, the Atlas Juniors program will have a week-long retreat for people from there. I know Israel has also evacuated or given the option to many people living in the Gaza Strip area or the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip to go to different hotels and so on, away from that area. So people from the south are moving kind of more to the center. Now people from the north are being encouraged to move to the center. Israel is a small country. There's only so far you can run away, and at some point they'll have to choose whether or not they want to fight back. There is reports in recent, maybe the last hour or so, of a ground operation. This is reported in Israeli media, so they wouldn't report it unless the IDF approves it. Of the IDF doing some sort of ground operation in Gaza, specifically to free some of the hostages. We'll see how that goes. And there's also a report that over 6,000 bombs have so far been dropped by Israel. In some, I think it was the Washington Post, they mentioned that this is more than a year of bombs dropped by the US in Afghanistan. Now, I didn't go into that story. I don't know if they specify a year. This is an average year in the 20-year war. And of course, that war, we know how that ended. So maybe that's not a good thing to compare to. If you're doing more than that, that is a good thing. All right. I think that is enough for updates for now. We can move on to the topic of today. So, Ayman, just so people know why it is that you're talking about this topic, can you give us a little bit of your background? And normally your background, you would say, I studied engineering, I'm a programmer, I came across Ayn Rand and so, but this is not the kind of background we're talking about today. So if you want to give us some details, please go ahead.
Yes, I mean, the very brief story would be that I was, my family's from Sudan, and I was born in Saudi Arabia, and my family moved from Saudi Arabia to the UK when I was around 5. As you would probably guess, my family entirely are Muslims from the north of Sudan. And my, experience, I guess, with Islam, or my relationship to Islam, is I became an atheist when I was 16. And many years later, I kind of discovered Ayn Rand. But I grew up, raised in probably a very normal Muslim family. And I was exposed to, probably a wide variety of ideas from mostly mainstream, I would say. And I guess that's the kind of, you want to ask me questions about that.
Yeah. So, but you've been back to Sudan a few times, right?
I've been, when I was very young, went to Sudan many times, and when we moved to the UK, it became more sporadic. But then, yeah, as an adult, I've been to Sudan, so I was probably early 20s the last time I went to Sudan, I think.
And you've also been to Saudi Arabia, right?
Since I've been to Saudi Arabia, I think twice when I was an adult. Yeah.
Okay, so you have sort of the context of the culture in Sudan, in Saudi Arabia, and the culture around maybe Muslim communities or some Muslim communities in the UK. So, Jewish people, specifically people in Israel, think that certainly the Arabs hate us, and maybe the wider Muslim world. This is kind of how it's seen. It's seen as we're hated completely, and there's nothing more to that. How paranoid is that attitude on behalf of Jews?
Won't surprise you to hear that that it's consistent with my experience of Muslims. I would say, anytime Jews come up, it's in some kind of negative fashion, in Muslim culture. I remember when I was young that the only time I heard about Jews would be, negative things. So obviously there'll be the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but very specific things that you would say that are, ideological or religion-based. I remember a teacher when I was young. We had a Muslim school thing in the UK, and a teacher just out of nowhere said, that the judgment day wouldn't come until all the Jews are killed. So I think maybe that's like a phrase in one of the hadiths. So this is like the teachings of the Prophet outside of the Quran, which maybe Jews are familiar with, because I think it's quoted by organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. And I remember, I think I was probably 12 years old, and it was nobody, back then.
This was a school in the UK.
This was a school in the UK. So I think this teacher was brought in maybe specifically from Saudi Arabia, and she was, it wasn't part of the class. It was just, she just said it, she wanted every kid in that class to hear, and it was a multi-age class. So it was, kids from 10 years old to like 18 years old. That's one. When you go to Sudan, if anyone's speaking about the Jews, it's always, that they're terrible, that they're bad people, or whatever it is. That would be the average take. And I mean, there's some people who don't, who when I ask them specifically, what do you think about Israelis? What do you think about Jews? That would say, they're just like us, and they're the conflict. We just want peace, and we don't want, conflict with these people. They tend to be like the minority, and they tend to be the most reasonable out of the Sudanese people, at least, that I've come across. Yes.
So, yeah, that's not very not very comforting.
So like, the people you see on the streets chanting "Gas the Jews" or all those people, I can, my guess is they're not actors.
Oh yeah.
So like, from my understanding, it's like these people actually do exist, and I would say they represent probably the average view. So there are even more extreme people than that, and then I would say the minority of Muslims at this point in time would be what you would call like having a reasonable view.
Do you think most Muslims in this country hate Jews in the UK?
So my experience is mostly of Sudanese people who are, I would say, more chill than some other Muslims around the world. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about hate, actively hate, but they know that they're supposed to hate them. That's definitely true. So there's absolutely no ambiguity on that point. So like, if you go to the mosque, you will hear anti-Jewish stuff. So it's not, there is no other voice. There's no other sort of point of view. You might just not care. You might ignore it, but there is no opposing view.
So you were 13 years old on 9/11? Was that?
I was young. It was before secondary school. I was still in primary school. So I think I'll probably be like 10, 11. I don't know.
Do you remember it? Do you remember the attitudes back then? You were living in this country. So
yeah, I remember very well. I mean, I'm without saying the exact people that were involved, I remember I was walking back from school, and I was walking with a Pakistani guy, and I walked past his house. So he went into his house, and I walked past. He ran outside, telling me to come in. I've never been in his house. I don't think I've told you this story.
no.
He ran out, shouted to me, he's like, come in, come in. So I go into his house, and I just, see his parents sitting down, looking slightly shocked. He was excited, and he was smiling, and he was pointing at the screen, telling me, I don't remember what he said, but I remember him being happy. I remember just leaving, going back home, and seeing the reactions of people there. I kind of don't want to say what the exact reactions of my very close family members, but from the wider Muslim community, there was definitely a mixture. There were people, I don't know what percentage, but many people were happy, cheering, saying this is what they deserve. But there were definitely some people who said it was wrong at the time.
And do you remember similar incidents, like when anything that happened in Israel, any of these rounds of fighting with Hamas, or the second war in Lebanon in, I think, 2006, Do you remember any of the reactions in the community back then, or?
I don't remember any specific conflict, but it was obviously it was always pro-Palestinian. There was no question about that. There was it's not something that people, I guess, in Sudan think about day to day. So they have their own problems, but it's I don't think there was no sort of discussion of the specifics. It didn't really matter what the specifics were. There was one side that you were for, and the other side is bad. And actually, just it's extremely tribal. So you would be told specifically you have to be on the Muslim side. There was no actual discussion about the specifics of who was right or who was doing what. It didn't really matter.
So things that I remember from growing up in Israel is, and I think I mentioned this sometime over this past week, when when there were daily terrorist attacks, and then Israel at some point went into the West Bank, surrounded Yasser Arafat's compound, and just surrounded it with tanks so that he couldn't go anywhere, but they didn't kill him. And I remember the arguments I would have with people saying, why are we not killing him? And the argument I would hear is, well, somebody worse will come along. And this is an argument I've been hearing, not in the past week, but previously in regards to Hamas. What if ISIS comes along next? From what you know about the way Israel is seen in most Muslim communities, is this a thing? Like, is the idea that if we kill the specific Islamic terrorist organization, get rid of the specific Islamic terrorist organization that's currently terrorizing us, is that going to be what will really get the Islamic world to hate us, or are we already there, I guess, in a sense?
I mean, I never got this. I don't get the sense that it would make any difference. It's for them. It's a fight to the end, fight to the death. It kind of reminds me of the stance that the US had with the Soviet Union. I heard stories that when they were both nuclear armed, that the US were trying to come up with game theoretic, strategies to figure out what will the Soviets do. If we drop a bomb, will they drop only one bomb? We need to have like some sort of, reasonable strategy that we don't destroy ourselves. And it came out decades later, after the Soviet Union collapsed, that the Soviets, their strategy was just, if one bomb drops on us, we're going to drop all the bombs. So like the Americans, for some reason, thought we're dealing with a rational enemy that has some sort of sense of self-preservation, that is going to act reasonably, and it was false. So I would say it's kind of similar with the Arabs. It's like if the Israelis are thinking, if we don't kill this one person, then they're going to like us a little bit more. It's going to increase our chances for this or that. It doesn't really make sense to me, because there's no moral ambiguity on the Muslim Arab side. It's like they need to win. So if you spare them, it just means that you're a fool, and they'll be able to fight another day. So I don't see any sense that, and it makes sense. Like, if you think you're in the right, why would you, if your enemy holds back, maybe that should give you pause. Like, maybe you think that means that they're not as bad as they are, but if you're convinced they're bad, it doesn't really matter.
So this idea in Israel, I think is definitely, it's on a break at the moment, but I'm sure it'll come back, which is ultimately we should have a peace deal with a future Palestinian state that will be in the West Bank and Gaza. And one of the ideas I heard today from one of the commentators in Israel, actually no, this was from Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, who said Israel should go into Gaza, get rid of Hamas, then take the Gaza Strip over temporarily, and then give it to an army that's set up especially by different Arab countries. So Egypt, Qatar, the Emirates, and so on would form an army that would take over the Gaza Strip also temporarily, and then ultimately give it to the Palestinian Authority, because in the long run, we need to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority to establish a Palestinian state. And that state will have peace with Israel. That's the idea. Is this idea based on your knowledge of how the Islamic world and the Arab world see Israel? Does it seem to you as delusional as it seems to me?
I mean, it's a very difficult question. I really don't know, but the idea of I don't think negotiating necessarily with the other Arab states matters that much, because you can see how much those other Arab states care about the Palestinians. They don't care. The Arabs are only united in their anger, but they're not actually united. They hate each other. Every Arab country hates every other Arab country. So I don't know what the solution is, but it makes sense to just have to secure Gaza completely. And if Israelis feel generous to actually, I guess, govern them and give them rights but just keep them under control, definitely it doesn't make sense to just let them. And I'm sure I'm trying to remember the example you were giving, the scenario, because it was kind of complicated. I didn't follow it completely. To give them their own government right now doesn't make sense. They're just going to elect Hamas again, or some version of Hamas. And so I don't see an option other than pacifying them. So what else are they going to do? I think the biggest mistake Israel is doing, and again, like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but the biggest mistake seems to be that they need the approval of a bunch of international so-called friends to defend themselves. So I think they just need to, I think they do have friends, but just not very good friends. People who would clearly see that Israel is their friend, and the other countries surrounding it aren't their friends. I'm thinking about France, the UK, America. But they want them to, I don't know, they want them to restrain themselves for whatever reason. If Israel just defends itself to the fullest, I don't think they're going to switch to attacking Israel. So I think, are Israelis afraid that the West is actually going to turn against them completely, as in actually invade them? I'm guessing not.
No, but I do think if Israel does the sort of military operation that that I think would be right in Gaza, sanctions are definitely going to be on the table. I think the aircraft carriers that the U.S. has sent to the area, I see that as a positive thing, but it could also be, again, I don't think there's any chance of the U.S. actually attacking Israel because Israel went too far. But I think it's sort of a
So that's not going to happen, but maybe sanctions. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a kind of a risk taker, but I would test those ideas, because I think that Israel is too afraid or too preoccupied with trying to convince other people that what it's doing is correct.
Yeah, and of course, as we've said throughout this past week, the operation in Gaza or in the south that came from Gaza, that's, if you look at it as an Iranian operation, ultimately, they're sending their what's the word for it? Like the front lines that you send to kind of die. The
cannon fodder.
Yeah, the cannon fodder. And so an operation from the north by Hezbollah is at least 10 times stronger than Hamas. They can do a lot more damage, and the two of them can do a lot more damage together, even without Israel, tying its own hands behind its back. But Israel will do that. So a ground operation in Gaza and being bogged down in that with an operation from the north, and then with the possibility of any Iranian involvement by Iran's actual army, is completely disastrous. And I'll say far more disastrous potentially than sanctions. So yeah, I agree. We should Israel should act militarily and not diplomatically at this point. I want to quickly ask you just one thing that you mentioned about the Arabs. Every Arab country hates every other Arab country. Like, you're not talking about, like, London and Manchester, people arguing who has the better city. You're talking about actual hatred that sometimes goes into actual military conflict, right?
There's
some cases.
obviously there's that, and then there's just like racial discrimination. It's almost, they're racist against other. So a a Saudi would be racist against definitely a Palestinian, but like maybe a Syrian would be a racist against a Saudi, or I'm not sure the exact examples, but you hear stories of how difficult it is to emigrate from one Arab country to the other Arab country, and how they're prejudiced against each other. So they don't they don't have very good relations with each other.
Yeah, and of course we saw that when Israel said a few days ago that people in Gaza should leave to Egypt, the Egyptians were like, "Hang on a second."
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it surprises some people, but and obviously the Western media doesn't really talk about it that much because I don't know. I mean, you can guess the reasons.
Yeah, and I've said, that we're trying to. Part of the reason for the updates is that people can avoid Western media. I happened to see a few interviews with Israelis over the past day, but I guess the interviews have happened over the past few days, and it's absolutely despicable the way they're being interviewed and asked about children dying. And of course, they're not talking about the babies that were beheaded in Israel or burned alive. They're talking about the children that Hamas is hiding behind while firing at Israel, and blaming, and the media is blaming Israel for that. So,
I mean, I encourage people to watch the mainstream media to get an understanding of what everyone else is saying, so you can actually sort of understand why people are misled or misinformed or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I did feel that the first day that Channel 4 News, which I always watch Channel 4 News in these kind of situations to figure out what the left thinks in the UK. And yeah, the first day was terrible in terms of clearly siding with Hamas, in my view. And then I think they probably embarrassed themselves a bit too much, and then they try to be more balanced. But you can see there's always this either clearly being against Israel or pretending that they're holding Israel to a higher standard because they can be held to a higher standard, which is the more center-left position. Yeah,
I saw something from Channel 4 about somebody on the ground, a Palestinian, reporting as if it's news the devastation that happened there, with of course no context on why that devastation is happening or who is actually to blame. But we will try to provide the alternative for that. And of course, if you think this is valuable content, please like it, share it, subscribe, help us get our alternative to the mainstream media out there to as many people as possible. Thank you, Ayman, for joining me. We will be live with the reality show in a couple of minutes. And just before we go, thank you, Bonnie, for your super chat, and thank you, Nicholas, for your super chat. By the way, as I've mentioned, we will also be streaming the Daily Objective on weekends, at least this coming weekend. I will be on, I assume, both days, and I'll also be on the reality show in a minute or so. So thanks, Ayman. Thanks, everybody, for watching. See you soon.
Cheers.